Hello guys, what's up? Welcome back to a Coder's Journey, episode number 3 of this course where we are working with TanStack Query. So I hope you've already watched the previous episodes, the episode number 1 where we set up, the API, and episode number 2 where we created two components for posts and for users, and we fetched some data from the backend using useQuery. I know that things might seem to be a little bit, complicated right now, but believe me, if you, continue watching the videos, everything will start to make more sense. Right now, what we have done is that we have started to use the TanStack Query in a very small and, very small project. We are using only one hook, use query. As the name suggests, use query allows us to initiate a query. Query means you are fetching something, compared to use mutation, which we will see in a couple of, I think in the next episode probably. So mutations help you to update, for example, a user or to create a user. So query, as the name suggests, use queries for fetching data. If you are familiar with CQRS in backend development, there is this concept called, let's say, command query responsibility segregation. Here, the same thing I think applies. So mutation is like a command for updating, for creating, and query is for fetching data. So command query and mutation and query. So the previous episode, we created two queries for users page and posts page. Here, I want to continue talking about creating a detail page for fetching a single resource. So right now, we are getting a list of users and a list of posts, right? Now we want to see how we can fetch one single resource. So we will modify our users page, our posts page, to include links to detailed pages for individual users and posts. We will also explore how to fetch a specific resources using unique query keys. If you're not familiar with query keys, I talked about query keys in the previous episode. Query key is an array that you can, populate with a unique key for your, query. And that query key is used when you want to, for example, cache your data. So based on that key, TanStack Query determines whether the query is stale or not. Does it need to do some refetching from the backend API or not? Let's talk about creating user detail page. We are going to create this component, user detail page, right? And it's not very, complicated, very different from the code that we wrote in the previous episode. Again, we are using this hook, right? We are creating this function, right? But if you take a look here, we are passing in an ID, the ID of the user that we want to fetch. So this fetch user, the other function that we had in the previous episode, what was fetch users? Fetch user is for getting one single user, and using the backend that we've got, the backend API using JSON server, we are allowed to do something like this. So we are allowed to pass an ID to this user's endpoint, and that will automatically return the user whose ID is or matches the ID that we are passing here. Again, I am using string interpolation, as I sometimes call it, or I think in JavaScript it is called template strings. In C# we call it string interpolation. So it means that I can pass in the ID here directly inside of this. I think you must be familiar with what this means in JavaScript. So this is the function that we've got. We have seen this before. We've got use query, and of course we've got use params from React Router DOM. So use params allows us to get the ID that is, or get the route parameter that is passed to this page, to this component. And you will see this in action, because with this, use params, you can actually get the ID that is passed to this component when the component is navigated to, and then you can take that ID, put it here, and then use this query to fetch a user from the backend. So the only difference here, I guess, with the component that we created in the previous episode for users page, is that we are fetching a specific user based on the ID. And this is the component. Take a look at the component, please. You get the user ID that is passed to this component using this hook, use params. And you capture this inside of this user ID. And then you have your hook, use query. And take a look at the query key. Not only you are passing this, key that we previously had for fetching all of the users, but you are also passing the user ID. And that allows us to kind of have a unique query key for this query, for caching, for, refetching and everything. And again, the query function is what we also did in the previous episode. These are also the things that we used to do in the previous episode. And again, here, we are showing the details of one single user, right? The data ID and name and email. And then we are exporting the component. Take a look here. This is the users page. This is what we did in the previous episode. By the way, I am on branch number 3. So this is what we did in the previous episode. But for user detail page, take a look here. We are working with this ID. The ID is passed in to this function. We capture this from the route, right? And then we are loading, we are showing the details of one user. So here again, the use params, it is coming from React Router DOM. Let me show you my package JSON. So I have installed 2 new dependencies, React DOM, React Router DOM, right? And then I am fetching users. I am specifying the unique key here. So use query. Our query key is now users, user ID. This is a unique key for fetching a specific user. TanStack Query understands that users 1, for example, is different from users 2, allowing it to cache data for each user independently. I told you that, query key is for specifying a unique key for the query that you are instantiating, that you are initiating. So users 1, users 2, based on the key, are different. So they will be 2 different things that need to be cached, for example, that need to be managed independently and separately. The next thing for us is to install this package, React Router DOM, which is something that I have already done. If you want to know more about React Router DOM, there is a playlist on my channel that you can watch. The same thing, we have done the same thing for the posts detail page, but before that, I am going to show you the changes that I need to create for users page. Let me take you to Visual Studio VS Code because I think this is more fun than reading the notes. So take a look here. This is what we talked about, right? So here we are receiving the ID of a user and then we are fetching the details of that single user. Now the question is, where does that ID come from? How can we navigate to this component user detail page and how we can pass through that ID? The answer is in the changes we made to this users page. So right now in the users page, as you can see, I am importing this link component from React Router DOM. This is the same as before. Everything is actually the same as before except for the table. If you take a look here, for each item I am rendering in the table, I am using the link component for being able to navigate to this page, to this URL with the user ID. So users/user.id. User.id comes from this object. So I am using user.id here. I am using user.id here for the 2 prop for this component. And that allows me to have like a link next to each row tr of my table. And I can click that, and for each URL, I will be navigated to this. I will be navigated to this route. Now, again, how does the application knows that when I navigate to this route, it needs to take me to this page, right? And set this user ID inside of the ID that I've got here. How does that know that? And if you are familiar with React Router, you already know the answer. If I go to my app.jsx, here I have defined the routes for my application. And if you take a look at this route, it says that when the user navigates to this route, /users/ a user ID, what you need to be able to render is user detail page, this. And the user detail page will, of course, capture this user ID using use params here. And of course, here, it will take that ID. It will take that ID, and the ID, as I showed you, is coming from here. It will take that ID, and it will render this user detail. And that means that you will be taken to this component. At that component, inside of it, it has this, hook, use query, it fetches the data of one single user. If I go to the application now, take a look here. We are on this route, users. And on each user, by the way, if I show you users, if I go to this, take a look here. So, by the way, I have created this, a default route as well. So it basically means that when there is no route, when you are on the home page of the application, navigate the user to this route. So /users will be the, let's say the default route of the application. So on the /users, what we are going to render is users page, which is something you are already familiar with from the previous episode. The only difference in the code from the previous episode is that we've got these links. And if I hover over these links, take a look at this part of my browser, you will see the route that I will be taken to whenever I click these. So I click these, one of these, I am taken to this route. And this is the component, user detail component. And that component, as I showed you, has a query inside of it using use query hook, and that use query hook is responsible for fetching some data from the backend API. What data? The data associated with this user, the user whose ID is 1. I'm taking this ID using use params. Use params is a hook from React Router DOM. I am taking that ID, I am injecting that ID inside of my query function, and I am fetching the data of this single user from the backend API. This is what is happening. This is how these two pages are related. And the same thing, guys, the same thing has happened for posts page as well. I am not going to go through these, but yeah, I think this is kind of important because I am using a different technique here. Let's see if we've got it in the notes for this episode. I think this is something that we need to do probably here or probably in the next video. So these are the things that I talked about. We talked about app.js6. We talked about creating post detail page. No, we didn't. This is the place that we need to, start talking about the detail page as well. So the detail page of the posts, again, very easy. This is the detail page, right? Again, right now, as you can see here, I am passing in the post ID. I am fetching the data for one single post. The same thing, but I am using this expand author. And I am going to tell you what this does. First, let me take you to posts. Take a look here. So we've got ID, category, title, author, right? If, I don't know whether you remember the backend API or not, just give me a second. I'm going to show you the backend API. So take a look here. The backend API is running. We are talking about the post. If you remember, the post had a nested object inside of it. So for each post, we had ID, category, title, and then a nested object called author, ID, name, and email. So the idea is that when I want to fetch the posts or one single post, I want to fetch the information for one author as well. And this is the reason why I was, using that expand author thing. Take a look here. So as you can see here, I am fetching inside of the posts page. Not only I am using this endpoint to fetch all of the posts, but I am using the question mark and then expand author to get the information for an author as well. Check this out. So I have ID category and then category ID title, right? This is the title, and then we've got the author and the details. And if I click the details, I will be taken to the details for this page. So for the details of this page, I've got ID, title, and then I've got the details for the author. And I'm going to show you how I have achieved this. Just think about this. For each post, we have a nested object called author. So for getting all of the posts, I am expanding the author. This means that I want the information for an author as well. Everything is the same as before, right? Except for this link component that I am using here. And the link component, as I showed you before, is navigating us to this component, /posts, and then a post ID. And this route is configured here. This is the route where we are being navigated to. Here, actually, this one. So whenever we are at this route with a post ID, we are going to navigate to post detail page. Now let's go to post detail page. In the post detail page, we are also expanding the author. So in the post page, we are expanding the author. This is not something we used to do. Here, we are expanding the author as well. Again, the only difference is that we are getting the post ID using use params. Using use params, we are getting the post ID. And then here, the post ID is here, right? We are creating the query function. We are incorporating the post ID. We are fetching the post using its ID, the ID that we have captured here. We are, calling this function we created here, and we are passing in the post ID that we captured using this hook. We are invoking this function. And then, remember that we are expanding authors as well. Take a look here. So here, we are fetching the information for a single post, and then we are also fetching the information of the author that resides inside of that post. Check out the syntax. The ID, as I told you, contains the ID that we get from the backend API. Where did that go? So we've got these three, right? These three. So we've got is loading, error, and data. Now, if I want to get to the post details or information, I can say data.id or data.title. These give back the information for a single post. But because author is a nested object inside of the post, if I want to get to the author, I of course need to go like this. Data author ID, data author name, data author email. And these are the details of an author connected with that post that we are fetching. So this is how everything has been wired up. You've got your routes here. This is how you are defining the details page. You have got your details page that are using the ID coming into the component. We are capturing it here. We are using it here. And then you've got your main pages with a link component that takes the user to this specific route using this specific ID. And of course, as I showed you, the query function has, each one of the query functions have like a different query key associated with them. And that, of course, means that they're all unique. Caching, refetching, all happen, independently of one another. These are the notes that I've got. I kind of talked about everything here. So take a look here. This function fetches data from this route. We've also added expand author to the URL. Assuming your JSON server supports this, it will include the author details within the post object. And then we've got the query function. We've got the posts page. The post page has this, data inside of it, one single post. And we can talk a little bit about the concept of routes and query keys. When we want to fetch a single resource based on an ID, like our post, we typically use an API endpoint with ID, like this or this. In TanStack Query, we use query keys that include the ID to uniquely identify the query for that specific resource. If you remember, for the query keys for each query function, we included the ID of the user or the ID of a post to kind of make that query key unique from other query keys. This approach allows TanStack Query to cache the data for individual resources. Data fetch for users 1 is cached separately from data for users 2. Manage the state of each individual resource and fetching them independently, like loading error data states there are tracked separately for each unique key. And invalidation and refetch specific resources. You can target a specific user or post for refetching by invalidating its unique query key. Understanding query.fetch status and query status. This is something that I haven't talked about before. This is something that we haven't implemented inside of the application, but I think it's kind of important. We need to, understand these, and then we will see a code snippet of how this works. So, query fetch status and query status. When you use query hook, it returns an object. And right now, if you take a look here, we are using only 3, let's say, properties. 3 parts of that object is loading, error, and data. But there are so many more that can help you to manage things, the way you like it. So it returns an object containing different properties related to the query state. 2 important properties are fetch status and status. So status, this property represents the overall status of the query. It can have the following values. You can pause the video here and study this section. I am going to probably come back to this later in the future episodes, because I want to implement them inside of an example and then show you what they mean. Because I think if you see them using an example, it will start to make more sense. And then you've got fetch status. This property specifically reflects the current background fetching activity of the query. It can have the following possible values. And these can really be helpful when you are, refetching data and, doing some background refetching and caching and so on. But I don't want to bore you with some theoretical, explanations here. It is better to see them in action. And here, the key differences for query status and query fetch status. Query status indicates the outcome of the last fetch attempt, and a query can have a status of success, while fetch status is fetching. If the TanStack query is refetching data in background, this allows you to show potentially a stale cache data. This is very helpful. Suppose, for example, you are communicating with a backend API which is very slow, and your latest fetch attempt was successful, but right now you are again refetching data. Because the previous attempt was successful, you can continue showing that data, which is probably a stale because it was cached, but you can continue showing that to the user while you are trying to update the data through refetching that from the backend API. Stale timeout, refetch interval, I'm not going to talk about these here. I will probably come back to these later and implement them inside of the application so that you can better understand them in action. But let's take a look here. This is again the other properties that you can set for use query. Here I am capturing this refetch alongside these 3. I am setting the query key, query function. I am setting the stale time and refetch interval. So refetch interval, it says refetch data every 5 minutes in the background. This is the data that you set every 5 minutes. Data is fresh for 1 minute. This is how you set up caching inside of your use query hook. So in this example, my data will be considered fresh for 1 minute. After that, if the component re-renders or the window gains focus, TanStack Query might refetch it in the background. Additionally, TanStack Query will automatically refetch the data every 5 minutes, regardless of its staleness. The refetch function returned by use query can be used to manually trigger a data refetch. We're going to show these in action. We're going to see how to configure the query. Right now, what we have set is query key and query function, but there are so many things that you can configure for a query. My intention was to show you how to set up the queries and then move towards mutations and show you how you can start creating resources using mutations. deleting resources using mutations. And then we will probably come back to queries and see how we can further configure them by adding more properties to our, functions, to our use query hooks. And that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Don't forget, you can get the code for this tutorial for free in the description of this video. You can go to my GitHub profile, clone the repository, work with it, and see how the application is set up. And that, I think, can help you to understand and learn things better. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for the next episode. Bye-bye.